It's the Arch Advocate Show. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for hitting subscribe. Thank you for telling a friend. Hey, good news, everybody. On today's episode of the Tim Preuss podcast, there's a special guest star. Guess who it is? He's got two thumbs and points at himself and says, it's this guy. Yeah, I'm on the Tim Preuss podcast today. Couple things we got three things to get to today. All right, 1, 2, 3. We've got the Alternative Influence Network. Dun dun dun. The AIN, the Alternative Influence Network. Did you guys read this? Did you guys see this little this YouTube thing? We're gonna get into that a little bit because it's hilarious. Also, we're gonna take another jab at what's going on surrounding the new Supreme Court Justice of the United States, SCOTUS, Brett Kavanaugh. And both of these things I'm going to use to illustrate this new religion of the left. And then we're going to talk about Bible stuff. So I think this show is going to blend up together pretty nicely. All right. The Alternative Influence Network. This was a piece that was put together by some lady. Remember that Dave Chappelle joke, like, what it's like to be a man, written by some lady, right? Some lady puts together this piece about the Alternative Influence Network, and it's really bizarre because she puts together this whole chart. Stefan Molyneux made the point, like it's like those scenes in A Beautiful Mind, with Russell Crowe about Professor John Nash. Where it's like he's just making all of these connections and he's seeing all of these patterns that don't really connect, but because he's the highest form of statistician, like everything, right? Everything affects everything, and this guy he's making all these connections. There's some very bizarre points in that movie that are really well put together to be on the screen so you can see it, but that's what this lady does, man. She's talking about the connection between Joe Rogan and Sargon of Akkad and Tommy Robinson and Milo Yiannopoulos and just like hundreds of people, and it's like, oh, there's this deep network of alternative influencers, man, and they're all getting together. And the one thing that I don't know that anybody else is going to make this point, so I'm kind of happy that I'm the one that's making it. Look, my whole life, since before I can remember, right, since I was like 1.5 years old, I have been around Christian people, religious people, and the types of religious people that will go forward at the end of the sermon and fall down on the floor and flop around like a fish and bark like a dog, right? Like I've been a part of religious groups of people that could very easily be called a cult, right? Not all of them, right? I've been a part of the mainstream. I've been part of offshoots and whatever. I say all that to say this, like, dude, I've seen it all. Like when it comes to the mechanism in our DNA and in our brain that causes our religious fervor, I consider myself to be a bit of an expert, a bit of a connoisseur, if you will, or at least a sommelier, right? Like I can, right? That's what a sommelier does, is like tells you like, well, here's what you're going to be drinking, here's probably how it's going to taste, and blah, 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 here's what's in it. I'm good at this. This is something I have a level of expertise on. And so when there's some very beautiful things that come out of whatever that mechanism is that's in us that causes faith and causes belief and has formed like these religious practices that we have. Like there's a very beautiful thing in that, right? It has caused the structure of, for example, like in the United States is far and away by a country mile way out ahead of everybody when it comes to charitable giving, right? We are the most charitable nation on the planet. One of the big reasons for that is our tax code, right? If I give money to the poor peoples of Haiti, I get to write that off, I get to send that receipt to the IRS and say, this was charitable money, so you can't tax me on this money. That incentive, right, that has been written by the federal government into our tax code, that incentive to give, like, that comes out of religion. That is there because of 1700 years of Christianity on the Western world. That's why that's there. That's a beautiful thing, very beautiful thing. But there's some very ugly things that come out of that very same thing. Now, there's atheists that will look at this, that, you know, they'll see this religious fervor that is coming out of the left, and they won't recognize it as being religious. But look, it is the exact same thing. It comes from the exact same place, right? This whole this faith, this religious fervor that the left is now demonstrating. Like, you know, for example, here's a good example. For 2,000 years, for almost 2,000 years, Christian people have been waiting for the end of the earth. Right, the second coming of Christ, the arrival of the Antichrist, and then Battle of Armageddon, and then Jesus comes back and rescues all of his people, and then God destroys the earth and all the bad people with it, right? Like the apocalyptic sort of, you know, expectation that religious people have. And atheists and non-believers, whatever, they'll look at us and be like, haha, you're such a weirdo, right? You're literally waiting for the sky to fall. And you don't, and the only reason that you believe it's gonna be that way is because some educated, you know, priestly kind of guy read some book and told you that this was gonna happen, and now you believe it and you're waiting for it and you can't wait for it to happen. Ha ha ha, stupid religious people, right? But look at the phenomenon of, you know, the doctrine of global warming, right? Are not the priests of global warming, are they not performers like Joel Osteen? Why is Al Gore the guy that is he's like the Joel Osteen of you know, preaching the good word of global warming? He's not a climate scientist. He's a performer, and he's made well over $500 million off of that doctrine that he teaches. And what is that doctrine? The earth is going to end. The sky is falling. Oh, we're all going to be punished for our evil deeds of polluting the air. It's religious fervor. And when an actual scientist, and not just a scientist, but when an actual, like, climate scientist, like the guy, you know, who started, you know, the Weather Channel or whatever, like when actual climate scientists speak up and they say, no, this isn't, you know, yeah, it's probably a pretty good idea if we back off of, you know, pouring exhaust into our air, but there's very good reason to believe that, one, the earth can heal itself, and two, you know, it's not as bad as Al Gore is saying it is, and not only that, but and not only that too, but like there's false prophecy in climate change. Right? Al Gore said that the polar ice caps would be melted by 2014. It did not happen. And yet, these people, you bring that up to them, and boy, you're going to get a ton of grief, because those people have faith. They have faith. Like, they saw Al Gore say something. It was later shown to be false prophecy, and yet those people still believe. It is the exact same. It comes from the exact same place that, you know, the Jehovah's Witnesses, you know, when their guy said, oh, Jesus is coming back in 1891, and then he didn't show up, or whatever the numbers were. But that guy said that Jesus was going to come back on a certain day. He didn't show up that day, and then he changed the day, and Jesus didn't show up that day either. And yet, the Jehovah's Witnesses have, I don't know, millions of members. But you bring that up to the Jehovah's Witnesses, and boy, they'll give you all kinds of excuses. They've already been trained on how to reply to that fact. To the fact. Fact. F-A-C-T, fact. Do the same thing to these people who will be like, "Oh, you're a science denier." It's like, but didn't Al Gore say the polar ice caps were going to be melted? They have a religious fervor, and they will condemn you and insult you if you don't go along with their religion. If you don't go along with my religion, the whole earth is going to burn. It's the exact same thing when Christians go around and say, if you don't convert to Christianity, you're going to burn in hell for eternity. It's the exact same thing. It's religion. I've seen it my whole life. Now, I don't talk against it, right? Because it's good, right? It's where, out of that religious nature, out of whatever it is that we have in us that causes us to worship and causes us to believe and causes us to have faith, like those things produce good in the earth. But just like everything else, there is a holy side and there is a profane. In everything, in every concept, there are two sides. And to think that you're going to be a human being and live out a life and that you're going to somehow be exempt from, I don't know, let's just call it religiosity. Right? You atheists that listen in, it's like you think you're exempt. You think you've gotten over it. You haven't. You have religion too. You have faith too. You believe in things that you know for a fact are not true. Right? And I could have people on this show like Sam the Liberal, who won't come back on the show, by the way. He still writes me and stuff, but he won't come back on the show because he knows. He knows. Like, he's a big believer in global warming, and he likes to insult people that don't believe it, but it's like, but dude, your people are false prophets. Everybody that you believe is a false prophet. You believe that Bill Nye is actually a science guy. And you know for a fact that he isn't. And yet you still believe. That thing, that mechanism, that energy, that is the same thing that you condemn in Christian people. It's the same thing that I condemn when I look at the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons and everybody else. You know what I mean? Or anybody, any fruit bag. Look, there are people that I am still close to. There are pastors that I still have the utmost respect for. Pastors that I love and I would submit, like I would sit and listen to their teaching any old day of the week. That teach that here, come up after the service and here, babble like a drunken lunatic, and that's going to be somehow the language of heaven, and you're going to be speaking God's language. They teach that, and I am very much against that kind of teaching. I believe that it's wrong, I believe that it's misleading, and I believe that it's the reason why Christianity is in the state of, affairs that it's in right now, is because of that kind of teaching. Right? But I still would listen to those pastors, because when it comes to actually, meeting out and dividing up, the word, they're pretty good at it. Here, look at it like this. How is it that somebody goes from running around insulting people with the accusation like, oh, you're a science denier. You're a science denier. Like, mankind has figured out this way of arriving at the truth. It's called the scientific process, and it always works. It doesn't always work right away. A lot of times it takes a very long time, even hundreds of years, but it always works. This method of asking questions and going to your peers and having them, bring your argument under scrutiny, and then, working it out, like it always works. And you're denying the power of the scientific process. You're a science denier. You're basically a caveman, right? And the rest of us were like, oh, I don't want to be a science denier. I don't want to be a caveman. I guess I better go along with what you're saying, because what you're saying is that I deny science and I don't want to be that guy. These very same people are now saying, a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man. All that a man has to do to become a woman is chop his penis off and his balls. That's all that it takes. It's like, well, okay, well, who's the science denier now? You're denying science. If you believe that, then you are literally denying science. Right? The scientific process and all of our scientific findings thus far as what we know about DNA and human physiology and testosterone and estrogen and, you know, like all these things, like everything that we know says, nope, no matter what you do to your physical appearance, if you're born a man, you're always going to be a man. And if you're born a woman, you're always going to be a woman. You can't switch out parts. It doesn't work that way. And now you're a science denier. And these people will continue on in their argument, in their denying of science. What is that called? What is that called? That is called religious fervor. Belief and dedication to an ideology despite the facts. Right? Despite what their argument would have been just, I don't know, 5 years ago. Nobody on the left would have said these ridiculous things 5 years ago. And now they're the ones denying science. And take these people that are saying, oh, this is this is the alternative influence network. That would be people like me, Tim Preuss, who just got kicked off of iTunes, by the way. He's not the only one. There's lots of people. I haven't gotten there yet, probably because my audience isn't that big. Once my audience gets big, I'm going to start losing, platforms. You better believe it. They've taken off, they've demonetized Steven Crowder. They've kicked Alex Jones completely off of the internet, pretty much. Right? Like these things, when you see this where they're like, oh, we need to take these people. These are the bad people. We need to get rid of them. That's exactly what the Catholic Church did 500 years ago. Oh, these people called these Protestants, they're protesting the church. We need to kill these people, man. These are bad people. They don't believe in the church. Let's kill them. Do you guys know that history, by the way? Like, the Anabaptist wars and all that, man, there was a lot of people that got killed. A lot. Jan Hus was killed, you know what I mean? It's a miracle that Martin Luther didn't get killed. There were many attempts on his life. But that's what I'm saying. It's that place where they're looking at people like Joe Rogan or Stefan Molyneux or Jordan Peterson or these kind of people, and they're like, oh, these are the bad people. This is the alternative influence network. Ooh, we gotta silence these people. We gotta get rid of these people. These are the bad people. That's religious fervor. Welcome to the new religion. Same thing with Brett Kavanaugh. I said I'd get to it. I wanted to tie this in, but you look at what's happening, right? We have had the right to face your accuser, the right to due process, the right to an attorney, like all these sorts of things. They're rights. We've built it into our system, and nobody ever questioned it. Nobody ever said, I don't think this is a good idea. Right? Because it is a good idea. It's a good idea. If you're accused of something, like, you need to be able to face your accuser. You need to be able to cross-examine. Right? These are things that are intrinsic to American life and should be intrinsic to the civilized, developed world. We're not running around in the Amazon jungle with spears. There are people who run around right now in the Amazon with spears. They've been untouched by modern life. They still live in the wild. They've never seen a white person. They've never heard the English language, and they stab each other with spears. They're brutes, right? There are people right now making television commercials and YouTube commercials and whatever, where they're saying like, well, we believe, the accuser. Okay, so what you want, ultimately, what you want is you want for there to be the ability where a woman can just say, well, that guy raped me, and then we don't go to court, we don't do any sort of, there's no proceedings, there's no lawyers, it's just that guy just goes immediately to jail, goes to prison because you said so. Are you sure? Are you sure that's the kind of world that you want to live in? You want the ability where you just want there to be a precedent where some lady just makes an accusation and Brett Kavanaugh goes to prison. You don't see any way that that bites you in the ass in just a couple of years. That's what you want. You want everyone to believe what you believe. Isn't that what that is? You just want people to believe what you believe. Okay, well that's, again, I've been around that my whole life. At no point in my life have I never been around that. Right? That's called religious fervor. That's what that is. It is the new religion. Where, yeah, don't worry about the fact that Al Gore is a false prophet and he made a false prophecy and he's not a climate scientist and he's making hundreds of millions of dollars flying around on his private jet telling everybody they got to change their ways or else the sky is going to fall. I have to believe what you believe or else I'm going to go to hell or else the world's going to burn. That's religious fervor. That's religion. And this is the new religion. And this is what we're up against. Oh, you're a science denier. Oh, but a man can become a woman if he just chops his dick off. But you're the science denier. That's religion. That's religious fervor. It's faith. It's a belief in a doctrine. It's a belief in a book. And the condemnation of anybody who doesn't believe what your book says, that's religious fervor. It has a good application. There is a holy side to that, but this, what we're seeing, this is the profane side of it. Right? That need to believe that some dude or some lady has all the answers, right? Or has more answers than you and knows the way, right? That's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing because, ultimately, if gone in the wrong direction, ultimately the end of that trail, standing at the end of that trail on a podium is Jim Jones offering you a cup of Kool-Aid. That's how that happened. Remember the story of Jim Jones? He took all those people down to the wherever that was. What was that, like Costa Rica or something? And filled a punch bowl full of cyanide and told everybody, hey, we're going to drink this poison and this Kool-Aid and we're all going to die. We're all going to go be with Jesus or whatever he told them. And the people did it. That's the weird part. They did it. Or the people there in San Diego, in Rancho Santa Fe, the Heaven's Gate people with the purple Nikes. Right? That's the profane side of when that religious part of us, that part of us that where faith comes from and where belief comes from and all that sort of thing, and the need for the truth, where all that comes from. There is a holy side. There is a holy destination for that aspect of our lives. But there's also a profane. And the profane is Jim Jones, the Heaven's Gate people, whatever. Right? And that's what we're seeing on the left right now is, we want Brett Kavanaugh to go to prison with no trial. We just want him to go straight to hell. Because we believe, man. And our belief is the right belief. It's profane, and you better keep your eye on it. Now, on to Bible stuff. Listen, prayer. Prayer is one thing that I'm kind of exploring in my life, and I will be writing about this. Is that when you go to church, especially if you grew up in the church, like you kind of come to this understanding of like what prayer is when you close your eyes and you bow your head and you say, Lord, I need some money, obviously, and my wife's been sick for the last 3 days. Can you please, can you heal my wife? Can you protect my children? Can you make it so that when the doctor tells me what's, the results of the test I just took, that everything will be okay. And thank you for the food, and thank you for whatever. In Jesus' name, amen. Right? At the end, we always sneeze out this little magic word, compilation. In Jesus' name, amen. Like a sneeze. In Jesus' name, amen. Like, as long as we say if it's in Jesus' name, then all of my little wishes will come true. Right? It's like we go to God with our list of demands, and we sneeze out these magic words at the end, and then we just expect that everything comes true. That's kind of, and I could be way off base, but my impression of what prayer is to a large swath, if not the majority of Christians, is that. It's a formula of how to get what you want out of the giant, welfare Santa Claus in the sky, who will just give you the wishes that you want as long as you say, in Jesus' name, so be it. Right? Well, what if, and I'm just spitballing here, and spitballing, I say spitballing because it's like, I'm actually not. This is something I've put a great deal of thought into, but I'm just spitballing here. What if prayer is something different? What if it's something different altogether? Paul, the apostle, said, pray without ceasing. Pray without ceasing. Well, that's a hard thing, isn't it? If the formula that we've been using is prayer, then it is impossible to pray without ceasing. The only way that would work is if you became a monk and committed yourself to a monastery and lived a monastic life, to where you were unencumbered with, the rigors of daily life, and you were able to pray all day. Under the current formula that we've come to know as prayer, the only way that we can do what Paul told us to do, to pray without ceasing, the only way to pull that off is to become a monk. And therefore, every Christian is then therefore obligated to go, leave their family and their children and their wives and their husbands and whatever, and go live in a monastery. That cannot be the answer. And since that cannot be the answer, then perhaps prayer is not what we've been told. What if it's something different? What if praying without ceasing was actually an obtainable goal? And in fact, what if Paul actually did it? What if he learned how to do it? Well, what would that look like? What would that look like? Because Paul was a busy guy. He was making tents. He was traveling all over the Mediterranean, climbing mountains, crossing plains, and talking to new people, and learning new languages, and writing books. How can you do all that and pray without ceasing? Right? Well, I think one of the answers could be, and again, I'm just shooting from the hip here, right? I'm just gonna throw you a couple jabs, see what you're made of. You guys tell me what you think about this, right? That word sin gives us a clue. This is kind of a funny thing. There is a word for the study of words. It's called etymology, right? And I'm going to read to you. Etymology is the study, it's a noun, the study of the origin of words and the way in which their meanings have changed throughout history. That's the Google dictionary one, so let me pull up Merriam-Webster because I don't trust Google. Definition of etymology: the history of linguistic forms, such as a word, shown by tracing its development since its earliest recorded occurrence in the language where it is found, by tracing its transmission from one language to another, by analyzing it into its component parts, by identifying its cognates in other languages, or by tracing it and its cognates to a common ancestral form in ancestral language. Okay, there, I like that better. Thank you, Merriam-Webster, since 1828. Etymology. All right, now sin is kind of a funny word, isn't it? And we're told that, sin is when you do something bad. That's a sin. And we're told growing up in church that sin, right? Wait for it. I know you're already thinking it. Well, sin is an old archery term, and it means to have missed the mark, right? How many times have you been told that in church? That is simultaneously true and as far away from true, as far into false land as you could possibly get. It's both. It's true that that's what that word means. It is an old, well, those things that are said from pulpits are true. Sin is an old English archery term, and it does mean to miss the mark. However, right, in our language, and as far as I know, in every single language, there are no two words that mean the exact same thing, right? Like, you can say, like you could look at a pine tree and an oak tree. Now, let's say you're walking through the forest, and there's pine trees and oak trees, and you're walking with your kid, and your kid points at a pine tree and says, "Hey, Dad, what is that?" And you say, "Oh, that's a tree." And then you keep walking, and then you can see an oak tree, and your kid says, "Hey, Dad, what is that?" You would say, "That's also a tree," right? That word "tree," it kind of means everything that is a tree, right? But then we have specific words like, well, what kind of tree is that? That's a pine. What kind of tree is that? That's an oak. You know what I mean? Like, the English language is actually very specific. Every language is specific to my knowledge. We don't have two words that mean the exact same thing. We may have two words that are very similar to one another, and they may mean something very similar, but not exactly, right? So you go back, if we're going to look into the etymology of that word sin, well, did the English people not have the word miss? Did they not have that in their vernacular? Was that not part of the English language when the word sin was being used? Why was it that they used that particular word, sin? They already had the word missed, right? You missed the mark. Hey, when you robbed that bank, boy, you really missed the mark there. The mark was, don't rob a bank, and you missed it. So why this word, sin? And what is the significance of that word that, when the Bible was translated from Hebrew and Greek into German, and then from German into English, like, why was it this particular word that was used? There was a lot of other words they could have used, but they used this one. And if you want to truly understand the meaning of this word, like, have you ever had, some of you may be into archery, right? Some of you may practice archery. And for those of you that never have, I did for a short time in my life, but I have not in decades, right? I was a teenager when I practiced archery. But, some of you have probably had, like, Nerf bow and arrows, or, had that. When we were kids, like, we had horrible toys when we were, like, remember lawn darts? And then a whole bunch of people got killed with lawn darts, and so they made them illegal. It's the same thing kind of happened. They don't sell bow and arrow sets at the toy store anymore for the same reason, right? They're not toys. You can kill people with those things. But archery, I'll tell you what. Archery is very much like playing pool, right? When you shoot pool, you have to have your breathing in order. You have to focus very intently on what you're doing. You have to calm down. You have to block out, the background noises and the commotion of the people and whatever. You know what I mean? Like you should. If you wear glasses, then you need to bring your glasses if you're going to go shoot pool. You know what I mean? Like, shooting pool takes a great deal of concentration. And even more so, does archery. Archery takes way more concentration, way more practice, right? And now think about this, right? When King James got the Bible translated into English, right? That's when that happened. That's when that word, when whatever it was in the Greek or the Hebrew that they were reading that said, okay, this is the thing that we're going to call sin. This was at a time before there were any firearms. There were no rifles. There were no cannons. There was, when people killed game for their meat, they did it with archers, with bows and arrows, through archery. And when men went to fight wars with other men, there were archers, right? Like archery was, if you remember that story about Chris Kyle, the American sniper, right? Like that's everybody who was an archer was basically Chris Kyle. It was a skill that, like, if you wanted to eat meat, like if you wanted to go get some venison or whatever, like there was only one option, and it was bow and arrow, and you had to be good at it. And also, like if you were good at it, but like let's say you shot at a deer, and instead of hitting it in its heart, you hit it in its belly, and then you had to go chase that animal all day, and maybe or maybe not find it, right? Like that you wounded that animal and it's going to die, and because of the way that you shot it, all that meat is going to be ruined, and you're going to have to eat gamey tasting meat until it's all done. That's a sin. What does it mean? What does sin mean? It means that you weren't focused. You didn't have your breathing in check. You weren't drawing from all of the practice that you had with a bow and arrow. You weren't doing that, entering into that flow state, that meditation in motion state where you took all of the knowledge that you had about this certain thing and about windage and about all this other stuff. You weren't focused. You missed because you weren't paying close enough attention to what you were doing. That's what sin means. That's why in archery there is no word for miss. The word sin doesn't mean miss. It means the reason why you missed. You missed because you weren't paying close enough attention. You weren't thinking and meditating at the same time that you were drawing back your arrow. Your arrow landed somewhere that you didn't want it to land, and now you've wounded this damn animal, and you're going to have to chase it all day, and you're going to have to eat its meat, which is going to taste gamey and nasty because that animal died in fear and in pain. And now your whole family and probably everybody in your village has to eat this crappy meat. And why? Because you weren't paying attention. You weren't meditating as you were pulling back that, pulling back the bowstring. You weren't focused. You weren't paying attention to the fact that the wind was going a little faster than normal. You took your shot when you knew that it wasn't going to hit him in his heart and drop him where he stood. That's a sin. Right? You follow what I'm saying? When you see that word sin in the Bible as it's written in English, there's a reason why it's not missed. Because there is no missing in archery. It's you screwed up because you weren't paying attention. You sinned. You missed because your head wasn't where it needed to be. And so that word translated into like whatever it was that the Hebrews were saying, whatever sin was, that's what they were saying. It's like, dude, you committed this thing. You did rob that bank, or you did screw over your neighbor, or you did, cheat on your spouse, or you told a lie, or you betrayed the public trust, or you did whatever you did because your head wasn't in the game. And you didn't hit the right mark because you weren't thinking. And you weren't meditating and simultaneously, using everything that you knew before you let that arrow fly. And because you let that arrow fly that way, you missed the mark. You see what I'm saying? And you caused damage because you missed the mark. That's the etymology of that word, sin. It is an old archery term, but it's way deeper. When you hear pastors saying, "Oh, it's an archery term," it's like, well, that doesn't saying it like that, there's no life in saying it that way if your audience has no experience with archery. Archery is one of just absolutely one of the highest forms of prayer. I believe that. You don't believe me? Okay, you know how runners, is there anybody listening in the audience that enjoys running? I don't. The only time I like running is if I'm in like the mountains or in the wilderness or something. I don't like running on pavement and concrete. It hurts and it's ugly. You know what I mean? But runners have a saying called meditation in motion, right? Or runner's high. And it doesn't matter if you're an atheist or a Satan worshiper or a Jehovah's Witness or whoever. If you're a runner, the reason why you are a runner is so that you can get that runner's high, known as meditation in motion. Running is a wonderful form of prayer, right? Because you enter into that state of mind, that flow state, right? Where your thoughts are so much easier to handle and they flow so much easier. And if you are a runner and you know what I'm talking about, I can assure you, archery is 100 times deeper. And it takes your whole life. It's never, you're never going to be Robin Hood. You're never going to master it. You're just going to keep getting better and better and better and deeper and deeper and deeper. If you want to learn how to pray, like number one, like if you don't have the money or whatever, like maybe you just don't have the other kind of resources that you would have nowhere to pick up a bow and arrow and shoot it safely so that you don't accidentally, hit your neighbor's kid or something. Like maybe you don't have that, right? But I strongly recommend that like you figure out a way if you can. And if you can't, then, I don't know. I was going to say take up pool, but pool's not any good because, it usually involves a bar with music and drunk people and whatever, and that's not a very good environment to meditation. But running, becoming a runner or somebody who puts on a pair of shoes and goes out into the woods for a few hours every now and again, every weekend or whatever, just get out, go for a long walk, and don't take anything with you except for water or food or whatever. But don't take your phone, don't take music, don't take any books. Don't take anything that would weigh you down other than water, and just go out and be in the woods and just move. Just go for a walk until it hits you. And then you will understand like what that means, what that pray without ceasing means. It means stay in that state. Stay in that place in your mind where it's like, because that's where you're communicating with God. If it's archery, right? Like that focused place, right? Where everything goes silent and you're intent on just that one thing, like that is where you get to talk to God. Actually, I take that back. That's where you get to hear God. That's where you get to hear God. Or I should say, let me correct that again. As far as a methodology or like a prescription on like how to learn different aspects of prayer and your own personal definition of prayer and what your prayer life is actually going to mean to you, those are some things that I can recommend. Like, well, if you do that, it's going to add a new dimension to your understanding of prayer. Right? Archery, playing pool if you can do it in a quiet place in solitude, running, surfing. Like if you live on a coast and like you've never gone surfing before, there's a lot of people in San Diego who've never surfed. Like if you live somewhere where you can surf, take up surfing. That is, that will get you into okay, how about this? Fishing, right? I know a lot of you guys fish. Tell me that's not, like when you go fishing, like tell me that's not a place where your mind just relaxes and you get into that flow state where nothing else matters and your thoughts flow a lot easier through your brain. That's why fishing is so addictive. It's because it's a form of meditation. It's a form of prayer. And if you look at it that way, right? You may have been fishing your whole life, and everything that I'm saying to right now, you're like, yeah, everybody knows that, Pete. Yeah, but have you ever looked at that as like, oh no, this is a holy thing. This is prayer. This is something that, since I can come out here and obtain this level of peace and tranquility or whatever, then it must be possible to carry this mindset around with me all the time and pray without ceasing. Just some food for thought, man. Prayer and the word sin, right? Because if you live like that, like if you live your life in prayer, then you won't be missing as much. I remember that story, I think it was the, I don't know, like the 1984 Olympics, whatever. Maybe it wasn't that one, but one of the Olympics, like there was a guy, I think he was an Australian guy, and he was last up to shoot, and he had the highest score, and he was guaranteed he was gonna get as long as he didn't miss too badly on his last shot, he was gonna get a gold medal. Right? He could have not hit it in center mass and still gotten a gold medal. His score was that high, and so everybody hushed down, and he pulls back his bow and he gets it centered and he lets it fly, and bang, right smack dab in the middle. Nailed it, right in the black, center mass. And he didn't even get a bronze medal. How is this possible? How is it that he put it in the black and lost so many points that he didn't medal at all? He hit the wrong target. He was aiming at the wrong target. He put the arrow exactly where he wanted to put it, but where he put it was the wrong place. He made a mistake. He was focused, right? He was in that meditational place. Everything that he did was perfect, except for one thing. One little mistake. He hit the wrong target. And that is a sin. Right? Pray without ceasing. That's the show for today. God bless all of you guys. Hey, if you like today's segment on prayer and sin, let me know. Let me know. How did that go? Did that make any sense? I don't know. Sometimes I just ramble. Thank you guys so much for tuning in this week. Check me out on the Tim Proyce podcast. If you want to support the show, go on to archadvocate.com, arch-advocate.com. And, if you want to give me some money, you can do that on PayPal, or you can become a Patreon supporter. And if you can't do that, please hit subscribe. That's a big one, people. Right? I'm trying to boost my numbers. I want to get so big that Jeff Bezos himself takes me off of his platform and hires a hitman to take me out. That's the show for today, and I will talk to you next week. Later.